you should chase rejection. So the more rejection you get, the happier you should be. So for every rejection you have, it's like, yes, this is good because I'm keep getting rejected. And the other thing, and we talked about this in our previous conversation, Miguel, too, is you only need one person. You need one person to take a chance on you.
Welcome back to another episode of Newcomers on Fire. Today I have Dr. Anish with an incredible story. I'm super excited. I'm not going to steal your thunder, Anish, but if you can tell us who is Anish and why did you become a doctor?
Yeah, no problem. First of all, thank you so much, Miguel, for the opportunity to speak. Super excited to be here and very much looking forward to this conversation. So in terms of the question, so who am I and how did I become a doctor? It's a great question I sometimes have trouble answering. So it goes back, I think, originally to when I was a kid. So actually, I remember a autobiography assignment that I did in grade 3. So I think I was like 7 years old. And they asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the only two things I wrote were, one, soccer player, which unfortunately did not work out, and two, was a doctor. And through a variety of luck and circumstances, we're very fortunate to actually achieve that. But as we've talked about before, my path has gone many different directions. But so the reason I think for me was, I saw one of my aunts is a doctor, and I saw a lot of my parents' friends being doctors. And so as a kid, it was just kind of classically, kind of built into me. I think also being an immigrant, growing up in an Indian household where your job is doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, and etc. It was kind of subtly forced upon me, if I had to say that properly. So I did well in school, touch wood. I always enjoyed science and math, and so the path for me was kind of this is what I'm going to do. And so originally applied to medical school out of high school. Was very fortunate to get into school in the UK. So grew up in Canada, but ended up moving to Scotland, where I did my medical degree, spent 6 years there. And then, the world changes and life happened and ended up leaving after becoming a doctor. So I know we're going to get into that. So, but yeah, the medicine thing was always a part of me. And, very fortunate to achieve that dream.
Oh, that's incredible, Anish. That's amazing. So this is what is crazy. And I'm still in awe about your story. So you became a doctor, all good. And then you come to Canada and you say, you know what? I'm going to pivot. I'm going to change. Can you just tell us what happened?
Yeah.
And also if this was something out of the blue or if it was just a gradual realization for that to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was, the way I like to say it, it was very, it was luck and circumstances. That's always what I think life is sometimes, is I think we have directions, I think we have ideas of where we think our life will be, and life happens. And, you have to adapt kind of as you go. And oftentimes, at least for me, I was very fortunate the way it was and, really kind of happy to be there. So essentially what happened was, when I was finishing medical school in the UK, I had to apply back to Canada to do my residency. And so basically, had to apply to each of the provinces to see if I could get a spot for me to essentially train as being a doctor here in Canada. And so because I went to school abroad, even though I was Canadian, I had to apply as an international student. And so when you apply as an international student, the number of spots available for those people is much less. And so it was much more difficult for me to get in. Essentially what happened was so when I applied back home, there's 2 exams you have to do. So one of them is a multiple choice exam, and then one of them is a clinical exam. So like where you're talking to patients. So I did really well on the clinical exam. But unfortunately, the multiple choice exam, I didn't meet the threshold to apply. So essentially, there was a cutoff score in order to apply to residency spots back in Canada, and I didn't make it. And unfortunately, because I had passed the exam, I couldn't retake the test. So essentially I was stuck in limbo, which was really unfortunate because, I spent 6 years of my life going to medical school. I had 5 first author publications. I spent every summer doing research and being back in Canada, in medicine. And because of one test, they said no. I said, okay, this is fine. And at that time I was really trying to speak to a lot of people in industries outside of medicine, particularly related to healthcare. So I ended up meeting somebody in investment banking and also somebody in consulting, and just asked them hey, as a scientist or doctor, are there roles for people like myself? And they're like, absolutely. People love, physicians that want to try to do something new. It's sometimes hard to sort of get to, and there are not a lot of spots available, but it is possible. And I said, okay, that's super cool. So at the time, essentially, I found out I wasn't going to get a residency spot in about February. This was February 2018. And so I was like, okay, I want to pivot, to your point. I want to figure out, what else can I do? And so my original goal was actually to go back to school. I was actually going to do a master's degree in London, in the UK, in sort of drug discovery and pharma management, basically thinking I was going to go into the pharma industry. And so applied to that program, got in, so thought that was my plan. And then that summer, after I graduated and before I would start, I essentially just kept applying for jobs. So I would reach out to folks, I would cold email them, I would message them on LinkedIn, I would ask for intros through like my parents or friends of mine that knew people. And I went nowhere, essentially. Like I applied to, I think, probably 75 jobs that summer. And, unfortunately, I got two final round interviews, but nowhere, like I wasn't, everybody said no. And then my dad told me about this thing called venture capital. And some people may be familiar with it, some may not. Essentially, the best way to describe it is like Shark Tank.
Yep.
And so I've seen Shark Tank before. I'm sure some people might have who've heard this, and Dragon's Den and stuff that's here based in Canada. And so I didn't know. My understanding was I thought this was only for technology or for like tech companies or for people building products. And my dad said no, it actually exists in healthcare. I was like, oh, I did not know that. Never heard about that before. Nobody told me about that. That was never a thing for me to look into. And so basically one Sunday in August, I just cold emailed the top 75 VC firms around the world. I said, hey, my name's Anish. I would love to chat with you if you're open to it. As you can imagine, a lot of people don't respond because, people are busy and have their things to do. But a couple of people did. And some we nice long emails. Some got on the phone with me. And then one group said, hey, we actually have an internship. Are you interested? I said, of course, but, I'd been rejected so much that I was like, there's no way this is going to happen. So I was almost like, pre-telling myself that I wasn't going to do it, which I've realized now is not a very good thing to do because we actually have a lot more power than I think we know we have. So anyway, I went into that interview, did 3 rounds of it. And then 2 days before I was about to move to my master's program, they said, yeah, we really like you.
Wow.
We'll see you in Amsterdam. And so, 2 weeks later, I got on a plane and moved to the Netherlands. Never expected in my life to live in Amsterdam. Had only been one time before, and what an experience it was. I ended up working for the corporate VC firm of one of the largest pharma companies in the world called Merck. So I was at M Ventures working on their team there. Incredible experience. So grateful I got to be able to do that. And then the reason I got back to Canada was I was applying for jobs again because it was only an internship, and reached out again to a lot of people, tried to speak to anybody that would talk to me, etc. And then in the end, this group called Amplitude was just starting up. They looked at my background and wanting somebody that had my experience. And so they, started as an early employee. So I ended up moving back to Canada. This was 2019. Originally was in Montreal. And then COVID shut down the world. So I ended up moving back home to Toronto during that time.
Wow.
So yeah, I've been kind of all over, and it's been a wild journey for sure.
Oh, wow. So much to unpack, Anish. It's incredible because what a story. First of all, I'm super happy that everything worked out for you and now you find your path. On the other hand, I'm super sad because at the same time, it's like, I know that there is a systemic issue kind of like wide, and not accepting doctors just out of like, I don't know, paper stuff. It's like, blows my mind. It's like, we can talk about that for the
administrative.
Yeah, it's
we can talk about that for a long time.
I know, but it's incredible. So a couple of things you mentioned: you apply a lot, you got rejected, you try a couple of doors, and they didn't open. So within this process, did you experience fear? Did you experience imposter syndrome? And how do you push through?
Yeah, it's a great question. I still say I think about that every day because I think every day you kind of show up and, always kind of had that idea. So I would say 100%, especially that summer. And I'll never forget there was a story where I got back from, like, I'm a big golfer. I love to golf. It's just one of the things I do. And so that summer I was playing golf and I had applied for a bunch of jobs in the morning. I'd been sending applications for like tons of jobs the entire summer. And I went out to the golf course and, was playing, was on my own, got back and I was at home. And my dad, for some reason, was just very angry. He's like, why are you golfing? Why aren't you applying for jobs? What's happening? It seems like you're not doing anything. And in my head, I was like, first of all, you don't know what I'm doing because I've been applying for jobs and they haven't gone anywhere. So I don't know what else to tell you. And he was just like, what's the point? Like, you should go back to medicine. Why are you not being able to do X, Y, and Z? Anyway, he was just very angry at me. And to me, that was like the day and moment I remember being like very upset. And very angry at like, somebody was able to one, say and do all this, but two, I was like, okay, is he right? And this is where, to your point, the fear comes in, where I was like, damn, like I've gone through all of this. I thought I was very capable. I got through medical school. I got a first-class degree at one of the best universities in the world.
Exactly.
And I can't get a job.
Exactly.
Right? And so I was like, oh no, what the hell is going on? Did I make a mistake? Did I screw up? Did I do something? And I think in those moments, it's really hard because the only thing you can do is continue to push forward. The only thing you can do is to try again. And really it comes down to like, the whole idea is like people always talk about, it's not how many times you get pushed down. It's always how many times you get back up.
Yeah.
And to me, it's one of those things where no matter what happened, the thing I think I've learned is, one, you have to trust the work that you've done. You have to trust in who you are. And also, you have to do as much as you can and put as much effort as possible. Because I think the other thing that sometimes people, don't think about necessarily is what they control and what they don't control.
Right.
And so to me, the reason why I went back to, trusting that process was I did a lot. I applied to 100 jobs that summer. I sent 75 cold emails. That was up to me. That was my effort. I controlled it. Nobody else did. And so going back to that, especially now, having, this been 6 years since that, which is hard to believe for me. But even going back to that moment I always think about this idea, again, it comes from the Stoics who, people, if they haven't read, should definitely read them. But this idea of control and controlling what you can and letting everything else go. And so I think to your point, going back to the original question of, what was I scared of? It was all the what ifs, all the, is everybody right? And is all the negativity right? And, is my self-talk really bad? But at the same time is realizing, no, like you can figure this out. Like, no, you did do this. No, you did go to Scotland and get a degree and went to medical school and, had first author publications and reached out to people and did all of that. Like that's something. And I think sometimes in those moments, you almost have to remember what you can do, what you have done, rather than what you didn't.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes we tend to focus on the negative rather than the positive.
Oh man, I love that because you're so right. Like I was an executive in Mexico. I come here 5 years, trying survival jobs. And at some point I was like, what is wrong with me? I was thinking, I'm broken, something happened. Why cannot I be as successful as I was before? And you're exactly right. Like, I think for me, it was the same point. Like, I'm not going back. I need to go through.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time. I think I became Canadian 4 years after I arrived. I became Canadian first, then I landed a job in my profession. Yeah. And it took me 8 years to get at the same level I had once. So it's like double.
Wow.
So, and the same master's degree, international experience, certification. Yeah. So it blows my mind that we come from, really good universities. We have a bunch of stuff, and it's so hard. So again, it's so hard. It's not us. We're not broken, but it's like the mindset and pushing through is like it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
Quick question about this process. Do you have a mentor? Do you have a group of people that help you? A community? How do you keep sane? Because it's very easy just to go on the vicious cycle of mental health, and it's like, hey, no confidence and so on.
Yeah. Negative self-talk. Yeah, I totally agree. No, I think for me, I mean, I've always been very grateful to have, I think the best mentor for me has always been my parents, especially my dad. And the reason I say that I got so lucky is because he's someone who, he started his career as an accountant, originally wanted to go to medical school, hated blood, so decided not to do that. Then got into the finance world doing accounting, and then really wanted to do banking. And so in order to get to banking, he had to actually go through a number of different paths as well, where he eventually started in accounting at a CA, then he moved to a venture capital firm actually, and was doing healthcare related stuff, and then eventually got into banking kind of later on. And so for him, I always go to him just as a person who, he's had such a unique career in terms of Canada. A lot of people and, people that in my industry now know me because of him and because of the work he's done. And, he was, some people call him like the pioneer of biotech in Canada because he's been around and was doing deals in the 1990s. And so to me, like having that in my household was a massive plus.
What a legacy.
And I just, again, that's it's a legacy, but also just feel super lucky because I know so many people don't have those people and, don't have that person that's next to them. And to be honest, like even for me when I was younger, I didn't really listen to him, wanted to hear him. Like, he's my dad. I wasn't going to talk to him about this. But all of a sudden when I was, entering this new field, and this new idea, understanding his perspective, and even today still, like, ask him a lot about, direction and career and where he goes. And he's helped a lot of people, sort of, with the same questions, trying to introduce them to folks, trying to get them on the right path. And I can't tell you the amount of people who are older than me, who have said, your dad's changed my life because of X, Y, and Z reason. And so I think because I had that role model in my household, that was always, he was the bar. And so having that person was very helpful to me. In terms of like other mentors that I kind of think about, I think a lot of them came, I would say probably more after I got into this career and sort of as I've gone over the last few years. But I think like, having somebody that's in your corner is really, really important. And, I was actually thinking about it even this weekend and, we were talking offline, Miguel, just before we got on that. It was my grandmother's 80th birthday. And I remember I wrote this piece a little while ago called Everyone Needs a Cheerleader. Yeah. And it was this idea based on her where I remember being young. I was like 18 years old. I just went to Scotland. I came home and I was sitting with her. This was like I think a summer day or something. And she's like, you're going to be a star. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? She's like, no, like you are. Like, I know that for full stop, like that you believe that. And that was the first time in my life I had ever heard that from someone else. And just to have that. And again, of course, your family always gasses you up and wants you to be excited. But to hear that specifically from her to say like, no, like you actually can do this. I think it was the first time for me that I believed it, or I believed that someone thought that it was possible. And so like, I always think about that moment a lot because that was over 10 years ago. And I still think about like, wow, like, there's so many people I think out there who are struggling, who don't have, unfortunately, anyone in their corner, and don't have anyone next to them or around them or somebody that says like, you got this, like, you're good, like, don't worry, like, you're fine. And I think we need that message these days more than ever. So to your point, just very grateful that I've had role models, particularly in my family, that have been super helpful.
That's incredible. A couple of things, and you're so right. To accomplish something as great as and important to move to a new country, for sure you need a community, you need friends, you need mentors, because it's impossible 100%. On your own. And the second thing that I was going to say is like, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So your dad sounds amazing, and I see the fruit in this case, and it's incredible. So yeah, I'm so happy that that you found that mentor in your household. So that's incredible.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you wish you knew before you enter into this busy world, the venture capitalist world?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is how much relationships are a cornerstone of everything. Right. And I have this belief over a long period of time. And I remember my dad, telling me this story years ago, and it's actually written in the book that, we're going to talk about. But it's this idea where like, at the end of the day, where you are and what you do is not as important in terms of like intellectually, like, how good your IQ is, or, how many degrees you have, or how smart you are technically. Some jobs it's particular, like, certain lawyers, or if you're a doctor in a very subset of a certain specialty, like, yeah, you have to be very technically sound. But to me, at the end of the day, is all relationships. It is all who you know, how well you know them, how well you can build relationships. Can you connect people? Do you listen to them? Do you try and provide help as much as possible? Are you always trying to, be around good people and try to help them advance their careers? Because I just believe over and over again that relationships are the cornerstone of being successful in anything. I know for me, especially in venture more than anything else, that is my bread and butter. That is why I have the job that I have, and that is why I'm able to be successful in certain things, is being able to connect with people, especially internationally, and especially people across industries, higher than you, lower than you, at the same level as you, and also just being able to talk to people as people, like not, there's no agenda. It's just like, hey, I love to talk to you, get to know who you are, understand what's going on. How can I help you? And I always think of networking as this idea that it's not short-term transactional, but it's actually long-term relationship building. And it's where it's like, this idea of, I want this relationship to last for the rest of my life. I don't want this to last about what I can get out of you today, because it's not really about what I can get out of you today. And I think that if you're patient, and I think if you show up for people, if you're a good person, if you try and help them with whatever they're working on, it will always come back to you. And again, going back to that story I was telling you with my dad, where this was like years ago, but he was on a plane going to New York from Toronto, met this guy in a suit next to him. They had a great conversation, chatted just about life and work and all this other stuff. Unfortunately, at the time, this was like pre-social media and cell phones, so he forgot to get his contact information, and so they kind of left. Then 5 years later, he sees the same guy at the airport and says, they do the kind of Spider-Man meme where they point at each other and are like, wait a second, I know you from somewhere. And so they got chatting again. They connected, and then a couple weeks later, they met for coffee, and I think it was a couple months later, the guy reached out and said, hey, we actually have a board position open in the U.S. Are you interested? Wow. And it was only because he didn't go into it with any agenda. There was no I want a job. There was no thing. It was literally he was a person, he was around, the opportunity came up, and that happened. And so I think a lot about that story, because I think there's no way when you went into that he had that idea or intention. It was just, he was trying to be a good person, talk to someone, have a good conversation, connect with them. And the other thing is, people like to work with people they like. Right. That's just unfortunately, that's human nature. And so I think really the relationship building skill, and I think it is a skill. I think some people can start, for example, as an introvert or, not very nice, but I think you can genuinely learn how to be a better people person. And I think there are a few good books to recommend. One is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yeah. You may have heard of. Another one is called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Coleman. That's another really good one. There's a few books that you can read that, again, genuinely I think are life-changing, because it's one of those where at any stage of your career, no matter if you're young, old, high up or not, being a good relationship person and building connections with people is super valuable. So I would say, out of all the one skills to me, and I think this is more telling myself that, just as a reminder of relationship building is so important.
Oh, I love that you said that, because that's exactly how I found my success in Canada. After well, I have one question and then I have my story, but it's so crazy because in Mexico we're a little bit more direct, and we tend to say hey, I need a job. So it's a little bit more in that sense. But in Canada,
very specific.
I learned that it's more about asking for advice. It's connecting with people, building relationships.
Yeah.
So it took me a while.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think to your point, I think it's, are you good?
Oh, sorry. I think it dropped a little bit, but yeah. No.
Oh, no.
Can you still hear me?
No problem. Yeah, I can still hear. No, I was just going to say, I think to your point, like culturally also understanding how different countries do certain things and how like, building in Canada and building relationships in North America versus other countries is very different. Because I remember, for example, when I was in the Netherlands, they're also a very direct society. Like they'll tell you like it is. They sometimes smile, don't. It's very German-like too. The Germans, I think, are also very similar to that. And so I think that's the other thing too, where to your point in Canada and North America, it's very much a, hey, how's it going? What are your kids like? What sports do you watch? What TV shows do you watch? Oh, you're traveling to this place. Oh, that's so cool. Like, I know, like that stuff, that small talk is very important. And I was very grateful because I learned that from my dad, and he was like, he is one of the best connectors I've ever met. And he always does a really good job of remembering those small details. And those small details, I think, make a big, big impact.
I was going to ask you about that because from my perspective, I was not good at it. I consider myself an introvert on the shy spectrum. So connecting with people, asking them for a coffee, invite them for a coffee, and all that was something new. So you learned that from your dad pretty much at early age, and then you just practice it, and that's why you're so successful.
But I would say part of it. I would say a lot of it I find is very subconscious. I think we all pick up our parents, fortunately or unfortunately. That's just how it is. But I think I didn't really apply it, I think, until I left medicine, where I was like in this realm of like the only way I got my job was because of networking, like full stop. That is because I reached out to people, had conversations, like had tons of chats. That was the only reason I got it. So because I had a lot of practice, I was able to do it over and over again and figure out like, what works, what doesn't. And I can tell you like, and this is the thing with the book that I love is there's no point in me keeping this information and not giving it to other people, because if other people use this and it helps them, it benefits everyone, right? We're all better for it. And so the way I structured my conversations was it was usually 30 minutes. 25 minutes, it was just me asking questions about them. So it was about career, it was about their life, it was about trends in the industry, it was about what they're excited about, it was about, biggest things that they're paying attention to. It was about like all of these things. And I think the thing that I realized is, one, people love talking about themselves. Yep. Everybody does. That's just a human nature thing. And two, like we all want to feel nostalgic. And I think there's a part of most people that wants to help the next generation, wants to help people that are interested. I think where people run into problems is when you go into networking with the, hey, I want a job, I don't want to talk to you. You know what I mean? Like most people don't want to talk to you because it's very direct. It's not the way to go. Versus if you say like, hey, like, tell me about your life and tell me about your career and tell me about your journey. And also if you listen, like that's the other thing too. Like I think there's one thing to, preparing your question list and, making sure you study them and know their background and story, but like listening to them. Right. And to your point, like picking up on signals, picking up on stories, picking up on cues, like all those things are so important. So the way I would do it is like 25 minutes out of 30, I would ask about them. I'd be like, tell me about your life, tell me about your story, tell me about your career, tell me about everything. And the last 5 minutes, I'd be like, really appreciate this time. Thank you so much. So grateful for it. I'm actually looking for a career in this industry. Do you know of any opportunities or do you know of any people I could speak to? That's it. And then you leave it. And worst case scenario is you've had a great conversation. Exactly. or a conversation. And the best case scenario is they can change your life. Yeah. But the thing is I think with that framework in mind, is your chance of success of getting a feedback after is so much higher. And I can tell you, like, this has continued to work for me to this day. Like I still ask, like I'm actually starting a new podcast series with a friend of mine in the industry, and it's going to be about venture capital and macroeconomics. And we've reached out to, 20 plus people already. And a part of it is when we reach out to them and talk to them and have this conversation, at the end is going to be, hey, it was a great conversation, loved it. Do you know anybody else we can talk to? And there's so many ways to do that. And that's the other thing I think you realize is people are very well connected more than you think. And every so often you'll meet someone who is like what I call a super connector, where they'll just put you in touch with tons of people. And those people are like amazing. And sometimes I try to be that as much as I have time and I can help folks that I can. But I think that's the other thing too, where to your point, Miguel, like I think it's practice and you can learn it. But I think you do have to really make it about the other person and not about yourself.
Oh, wow. I'm so surprised and impressed at the same time that it's the same thing in different industries, because also within the banking industry, I can tell you that over coffee meetings, I have landed my last 6 job promotions. And it's exactly like that. It's just like having that conversation, connecting with person, helping. So it works everywhere. So I'm super good. Yeah. You wrote a book, but I have this question that is like, for people looking into get into the healthcare BC world, the skills, experiences, advice that you have for them. Of course, you wrote a book, so what will be the top 3 things that come to mind?
Ooh, good question. Just to get into healthcare VC specifically, or you mean try to change careers? Okay, so for healthcare VC specifically, I'd say one, I think we have to be a good relationship person. I think being a networker, meet people, I think that's super huge. Two, I think having a personal thesis on what you like to invest in and why is super important. And this was advice that I got when I was applying for jobs, where I remember in an interview, and one of the partners at this firm I was looking for, I was actually a job in Germany, was like, hey, what do you want to invest in? And I was like, oh, I really want to invest in oncology and women's health, because I had previously worked for a firm that was oncology and women's health. So I was like, oh, I'll just tell them what I've been doing. And she's like, no, that's not an answer. She's like, what do you want to invest in? She's like, what do you believe in? Like, why would you invest in what you want to invest in? And I was like, I've never thought about that. I've never had a thesis. I've never had an opinion. I was just, what I was told to invest in, I'm investing in. So therefore, that's what I'm doing. And so I think that question really opened my mind, because I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Where would I go? Where would I put my money? Why would I think that I should spend time in one area versus another? And over the years, that's definitely been really helpful, because then it's allowed me to kind of pay attention to, like, what am I really excited about? What's not so exciting? Where should I spend my time and not spending my time? I think especially when you're coming into this world, having that perspective already, where, like, for example, if I'm interviewing you and you're like, hey, for argument's sake, like, somebody says mental health. It's like, okay, that's pretty surface level. But if you say, like, hey, I think digital therapeutics in ADHD is super helpful because of X, Y, and Z reason. Here are all the companies doing it. Here's all the competition. Here's why it's better than current treatments. That is an automatic signal that this person knows what they're talking about. And so I think the level of understanding and depth. And I think the other thing is just, you have to have such a curiosity of interests and ideas in terms of VC, because we have to cover so many industries, like even within healthcare. So we do healthcare specific. I work primarily in biotech, but also like in a bit of digital health and medtech. I have to have an opinion or idea about all of it, right? In terms of like, where are companies, what's going on, what's interesting, exciting, what's not. I meet entrepreneurs doing various different things all the time. And so I think you have to have this kind of self-starter, motivational, entrepreneurial mentality almost, where you're like, I want to learn everything, and I'm really interested to hear about what else is going on and how that fits in. So, I mean, I don't know if that's 3, maybe that's more, but those are a couple of how I think about it.
Oh man, this is incredible. We can do, to your point, we can do a podcast on that, just because it's like, it's a huge world. Sure. That's incredible. So, yes. Yeah, I'm super also very curious about your journey, about how did you become an author, a writer, because you have written over 800 blog posts, over 100 book reviews or more, 2 books, you name it. So did that just happen? Was that something recent? Just if you can tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say when I was a kid, I never thought I was going to be an author. In fact, I never thought I was a good writer. I genuinely was just like, every time you go to school, you have to do those essays and assignments, the ones everybody hates. I just thought I had to do them to do them. And then grade 12, it was my final year of high school, I was doing really well in English. And I was like, kind of curious, because I was like, I don't really like English, like, it's fine, but I don't really understand. And my teacher, I remember my English teacher was like, you're a really good writer, like really good writer. And I was like, I did not think about it, did not think anything. Anyway, passed through medical school, didn't write at all, was, doing all the medicine stuff or whatever. And then what happened was, when I finished medicine, I'd been a big podcast fan and still am to this day. Like, I've been, listening to podcasts for over a decade. And I was listening to this podcast that was talking about successful people, and a lot of them had consistently like 3 things that they did, which was reading, writing, and meditating. And so what happened was, when I left medicine, I said, okay, let me try and institute these habits into my life. I'll start with a year. It'll be an experiment. Maybe it will work. Maybe it won't. And so from that day, I started a journal. And I was like, you know what? Every night, I'm just going to write a journal, and I'll put one entry in, and then, we'll see where it ends up. And so this was 2018. This was like right before I actually moved to Amsterdam. And so basically from that day, every day, I've been writing a journal. And so like, this is one of them right now. And this is like a bunch of them. But this is my 6th book, I think, 6th or 7th book already. Wow. Because it's been, 6 or 7 years. And so from that day, I've never stopped. Essentially, like, I've been writing every day for the last 6 years. And so what happened was, that was just a personal thing. That was just for me. And then in 2021, I decided to start a blog, as you mentioned. And the goal of that year was, I wanted to write 100 blog posts in a year. And it was a lofty goal, like 2 a week. And I was like, okay, we'll see. I've been writing for a little while now. Let's see how it goes. I ended up writing 500. So it was a lot more than I had anticipated.
Yeah. Or more.
Yeah, which it was a lot. Yeah, sometimes it was a lot. And some days I would write nothing. Other days I would write, I think the most I wrote in one day was like 8 things, which was crazy, because all of them were different subjects. It wasn't even like they were related. So anyway, that was a couple years ago. And to this day, still, I still write, I still post, I still publish, I still do all these things. Then what happened last year was, Originally the plan was I wanted to run a marathon. So I think Miguel, you and I talked about this. I actually decided I wanted to run a marathon in January. Set my mind to it. Never run, not a racer, not a runner. 4 months later, I ran the Toronto Marathon. I was really excited about it. It was awesome. And then I finished, and I was like, well, I have the rest of the year. What am I going to do now? Exactly. And as you can probably tell, I'm one of those people who I have to be doing something. Yeah. This was like I had always thought I wanted to write. And write a book that I could actually give someone. Because even though I was writing blog posts and I was writing in my journal, it wasn't as tangible as a real book. And so I was like, okay. So I reached out to an independent publisher who I had met kind of before. I talked to her about a couple ideas. She was like, hey, what about your career and your journey? From going from medicine to venture and what you learned along the way. And I was like, yeah, that's actually a really good idea, because I've never seen a resource that talks about that journey and what it's like, but also not just the journey, but also like actual steps, like genuine, do this, then do this, then do this. And so I wanted to write it. Honestly, I wrote it for me, respectfully. Like I wrote it for my younger self. And, the kid that was in university that was stuck, that had nowhere to go, that was my audience. That was always my audience in mind. That was who I was writing for. And so, yeah, that was the kind of journey where I talked to her about it. Essentially, over the summer, I wrote it over a summer. It was brand new. I was like, okay, I want to keep this reasonably short. I don't want it to be too long. I started June of last year and then finished in September. It was a busy summer, as you can imagine. But yeah, that was the kind of journey to now being an author, which still to this day boggles my mind. I still when I see this book in front of me, it's hard to believe that this is mine and I created it. But such is life sometimes.
Oh, that's incredible. So much to unpack. For good writers to write, sometimes they just do it because it's part of the habit, but sometimes it's because you're in the flow, you're in the zone. So
yes.
How does that work for you? Do you find your flow very quickly, or is it just like mechanically a routine?
It's a great question. I would say, to me, with the journal, it's more consistency of effort. It's just like, even if I don't want to write, I still write. Like, some days I'll literally be like, I don't want to write this. I don't know what I'm doing. I hate this. Why am I doing this? Like, literally, some of my blog entries are like that. For the blog is definitely more of an idea comes to mind and I have to write it. And so it's like, I'm thinking about this idea, or stuff comes up in my life. Like, for example, recently, I've had this idea about intuition. And I wrote this post called Chase Curiosity. And it's this idea where we all have these things in our life when we're kids or not kids, and it's like this small voice. And I heard, the reason I was thinking about it was because I heard a Steven Spielberg interview. Many people may know Steven Spielberg, one of the most famous directors ever, where he talked about this idea of when he was a kid, there was a small voice that always talked to him and always was telling him about what he wants to do. And he's like, it won't be loud and it's not going to scream at you in your face, but it will be there and it'll be really small. And I heard this idea, and then I kept seeing this the last few weeks. And so I wrote this post called Chase Curiosity. And so I think when I have things like that, where stuff is happening around me and I'm hearing sort of different things all the time, I'll then go and I'll go and flow and I'll just write. So I think it depends, I would say. I think to me, in order to get to that state, because I've been writing for so long, it just comes, and when it comes, I just do. It's almost second nature, where it's like, I have this idea, I gotta write it. And so I think when those things happen, sometimes they need a bit of a push, and I'm like, I gotta kind of labor through it. Like right now, for example, I'm writing this post called Dear Canada, or thinking about this idea called Dear Canada, where I just really want to talk to our politicians and leaders of I don't think we're set up properly in the next in the next decade, but I think we can be, and we have all the components to be. And I think we need to change some structural things in terms of macro. We need to change some things on innovation. We need to change some things in terms of really putting emphasis on what we do really well, and policy, especially for what we do exceptionally well. So anyway, but again, that's an idea I've had bubbling for the last few weeks. I'll write it when it comes up. There'll be a time. To your point, the process is kind of ever changing, but it kind of goes between a bunch of different things.
Anish, as I mentioned before, I think you're a brother from a different mother, because I also have my my journal as well. Very Amazing. Similar to you. Yeah. Since I read your blog, and it's like, oh man, yeah, you're so right. I was writing everywhere, so I started I'm so inspired by him. I'm going to do something similar. So. Yeah, it's
good for you.
No, I can tell you that you have inspired me and influenced me. So definitely, I'm super happy about that.
Thank you.
And
that's awesome. Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's one of those things that is oh yeah, why not? And he was able to do it. I think I'm able to do it too. So
yeah.
So quick question about challenges about writing, because I'm very interested in this process of. There is a lot of people that also write, and especially their journey. Writing is also therapeutic. That's another way of. Helping the process of mental health, especially for a newcomer that is struggling. Just imagine another 1,000%. Doctor. In fact, I know a doctor, neurosurgeon, driving Uber, and you can just imagine how that person feels.
Yeah, right? It's insane. So, 1,000%.
I know. And that's why we do this, Anish. Thanks so much for helping.
Yeah,
But
of course.
like in terms of challenges for writing, and if any recommendations, and how can we use it in a way that can help us, flush through or go through?
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%. I actually think in general, for those who aren't writers or don't think of themselves as writers, first of all, we all are writers. Second of all, I think writing is probably one of the most important decisions that I've made for my life. And it first started, to your point, with writing for myself. And the reason I say that's important is because all of these ideas, and I think these things that we have in mind that we think about, actually putting them on paper is super helpful because one, it gets it out of your head. Two, then you are forced to clarify your own thinking. And what that means is when you write it down and write an idea down, you then have to explain it to yourself, to the words, to the page or whatever. And you'd have to think of like to someone else, right? Like if someone else was trying to understand you, how do you think about it? How do you understand it? So I think to me, writing in general is one of the best unlocks, especially to your point for mental health, because I think one of the things that I go back to is like for example, let's say if you're anxious or depressed, where your thoughts are always ruminating or the world is always negative and there's nothing going on. Even just writing that down to say, I don't like the world, this feels negative, I don't understand why this person said this to me, I'm really upset because of X, Y, and Z. Verbalizing it is so helpful. Again, there's a reason why people go to therapy. And the reason why people go to therapy is because then there's a person who has no judgment about what you're doing and is able to listen to you non-judgmentally to get what you're saying. It takes a lot of time for people to open up to do that. But what I find with writing is you can do that for yourself on a page. Because the other thing too is, and I would, again, this is up to everybody to decide whether they want to share it or not. I would argue don't share with anyone at the beginning. Don't tell anybody about it. Don't let anybody know, because you don't want this to be like a vanity thing that you do for other people, because this should be important to you. And I also find that, from people that I've spoken to who do journal, where if you do it consistently, and this is the other thing too, is you can't expect results in one day or 1 week, right? You can't expect that, all your problems are going to get solved tomorrow. It will not happen. But if you are consistent, if you show up, if you try a little bit, even if it's a minute, even if it's a paragraph, just a little bit every day, I think, over time, you will see how massively helpful it is for you. Because then it's like, and the reason I say this for me is like, it's helped me clarify why I am the person I am, right? It's helped me clarify emotions. It's helped me clarify memories. It's helped me clarify, why do I react in certain situations? Where does that come from? Why am I like this? All these things where I think, and again, especially, if you do have the ability to go to therapy, that's amazing. You should go. It's incredible. I do agree with that. But for a lot of people, they don't. And writing is a great therapy, because you can write and get all your thoughts on paper. And the other thing too is, if you keep it to yourself, nobody else will know, you can at least clarify. And then at least it's helpful to you, because then also I think what it does is it shows you your progress over time. So then you can go back to your old writing and your old stuff, and you can see, like, what was I like at this time? What was I like at that time? So yeah, no, I mean, I am a huge proponent of writing. One of my goals in my life is to get more people to write, even if it's terrible, literally, even if it's terrible, because I think the world needs more writing and needs more creativity and needs more people who are willing to share what their story is. And so, yeah, write. I think the thing is, and it sounds like crazy advice, but really just like anything. It could be the worst thing in the world. In fact, if it is the worst thing in the world, that's great, because it's better than people who haven't written.
Yes.
So like anything you can do is to just get it on paper. So no, huge fan of writing. For sure.
I love that. And you're so right. Like, I do recommend therapy. Therapy has helped me so much, but also therapy has, it's costly. But if you don't have benefits,
exactly,
you don't have
very
access
expensive.
to that, and I haven't seen any program from the government saying like, hey, mental health is important, let's help newcomers. I will say, writing is the second best, for sure. So you should totally do it.
1,000%.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So let's think about newcomers that are struggling. And what will be your top 3, I will say, recommendations or advice for them to say, right now it's dark, right now things are not working, I'm working in this survival job that's crazy, but from your perspective, what are those 3 things that I could focus on and say like, okay, maybe this could help me?
Yeah, so one, I would say getting clarity on what you want. And what I mean by that is really understanding first, what do you want? Like, what role do you want? What job do you want? Where do you want to be? What are you doing? And writing that down. And this is where I think, again, it speaks to what we were talking about before. I think writing goals down is one of the most underrated life hacks I think I've ever heard of, seen anybody spoken to. Because I think making it real, making it physical, making it in front of you is such a massive lift that I think people just highly underestimate. So that's the first thing I would kind of think of. Second thing is, okay, so now you know what you want. How do you get there? There's a path to get there. The first thing I think you need to do is read and research, right? So let's say, you're a newcomer to your point, they're the neurosurgeon, and you're like, okay, I really need to understand, how do if I want to do neurosurgery, let's say for argument's sake, it's like I want to do neurosurgery. It's like, okay, well, I need to understand what is the path to get there. So what exams do I need to do? What placements do I need to do? Which people are doing it? Who can I speak to? And then I think the third thing that kind of comes to it is you need to talk to people. You need to reach out and you need to build your network, right? And that's, I think, something that, you're a big proponent of, Miguel, and I am too, which is like, you need to have conversations with people. And I think, again, you always need to frame it in the perspective of, hey, I'm looking for advice, not I'm looking for a job. Because if you frame it in looking for advice, everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to help someone with advice. And especially if you frame it as hey, I was a neurosurgeon in this, this is my background, this is what I've done. I'm really struggling and trying to understand what the role is like here. I would love to talk to you, open to it, right? And the thing is, now with Google and LinkedIn and everything, like, you can find contact information for most people around the world, right? Like, celebrities a bit harder, and there's like a couple of people you can't necessarily get to, but like CEOs, any professor at any university, any doctor anywhere, like, an office, anything, like, there are ways to find it. And so I think, to me, it starts with one, clarifying what you want, two, figuring out and doing research, right? And really understanding the problem, like really understand what you're looking for, really doing your homework, because, and you're not going to figure it out overnight, but if you take 2 or 3 months, you can become an expert on a lot very quickly, right? And even if you spend an hour a day, like if you're just like, for example, if you're, I don't know, trying to get into social media marketing, for argument's sake, right? You can become an expert on social media marketing in 2 to 3 months, easy in my opinion, because there's so many resources, and it's just committing to stuff and really trying. And then at that point, it's okay, who can I reach out to that's doing this, that I can talk to, that has ideas, right? And I think if you show initiative, if you show your background, if you show the work that you're doing, and if you're a good person, people will help you. Right. They will want to help you. It's like a human nature thing, right? Like, we are social creatures. We want to help people we like. And if you show up and are like, and can give that to people, I think that's huge. So I agree. Because I understand too. Like, being a newcomer in general is really difficult. I think, like, trying to come to a new place and figuring life out, especially in Canada, is not easy. But I think the thing I would say is, I think there's a lot of people, Canadians are genuinely, I think, very helpful people, and I think are really kind and really nice and really do want to help. And so my thing is, but at the same time, like, you shouldn't go into it with a expectation of, oh, I'm going to get a job tomorrow in my industry and it's going to be fine. Exactly. Like, no, you have to do work. Like, you have to work for it. To your point, Miguel, you have to spend your time. You have to, figure out what you want to do. You have to meet people. You have to network. You have to go coffee shops, and also expect that, it's going to be hard at the beginning. You will fail. It's okay. That's part of it. That's all part of the journey, right? And I think the important thing is, how do you reflect on it? How do you get better? How do you improve over time? How do you progress? And if you can do that, I think you'll be fine. So I think, I don't know if that's great advice, but that's at least the way I think about it in terms of a process.
I think it's great advice. And just to add to what you just mentioned, I would say for sure mentoring is very important. To get a job, to your point, it's directly is not recommended 100%. But at the same time, it's about building relationship. It's about connecting. And escaped my mind, but okay, I'm going to remember about that topic. I'm just thinking about something. Perfect. So imagine this, like, this person is used to do what they do back in home, back in their country. And of course, here they cannot do it for any reasons, or they need to repeat school, or they need to do different things. So sometimes they need to pivot or change careers. You are pretty much an expert on that topic. So what would you recommend them to overcome self-doubt or this negative thinking about, like, oh, I have not done that. Maybe I'm not the greatest candidate, or something like that.
It's a great question. Sometimes it's as easy as go to YouTube and type in motivational videos. So because sometimes you just, you need some guy that's telling you, like, you can do it. There's a couple of things I think for me. It's one is, and again, I think there's a few ways to tackle this. One of the ideas that I have is, and it speaks to what we were talking about before on writing, is to understand why do you have that perspective? Like, where does that perspective come from? Why do you have that belief? Who built that into you? Because also, I think that one of the things I read many years ago in this book is all your thoughts that are put in your head are not necessarily yours. They're put there by someone else, and you then internalize them and believe them as your own, but they're not. And until you understand that, it's really hard. I think two is really then deciding, like, okay, like taking a real hard look in the mirror to understand, what have I done, right? In terms of, like, what am I trying? What am I doing? How much effort am I putting into doing this? Because if you say, like, I'm really struggling and, I can't get a job, but you've not submitted applications, you've not improved yourself, you've not learned, you've not tried, you've not reached out to people, then it's really hard for me to say that it's going to change, right? Because you kind of have been the same. Versus if you're one that's like, you know what, like, okay, I'm putting in all my effort. I'm really I'm improving myself. Like, I'm trying to do better. I'm reading. I'm getting up to speed on what's happening in whatever industry I'm doing. And then you're still persistent. It will happen. It will just, sometimes it might take longer, but it will happen. And so I think it's also reframing this idea of you haven't got to where you are yet,
Right.
but you will get there. Right. And you have the ability to do it because you do have the ability. Right. I think sometimes, like I've heard from other people that talk about imposter syndrome, is in order to go forward, sometimes you have to remember what you have done. Because in any situation, in any case, all of us started as a beginner. Right. And I think Steve Jobs, I think quoted this or Bill Gates did, where he's like, I think it was, Steve Jobs in a book he recently wrote, where he's like, at any point in time, everything that was built around you in the world started off by someone no smarter than you are. And someone who just figured it out and had to go. And so I think all of us, you have to think of this mentality as all of us are beginners wherever we are,
Exactly.
right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a power, because that means you come for the problem in a new direction, in a new way. And so to me, it's just super helpful, because then it's like, okay, it becomes, I think it's also reframing problems as exciting, right? Or and failure as excitement. It's like I was listening to this or reading this book last week called $1 Million Weekend. It's this idea of like, you should chase rejection. So the more rejection you get, the happier you should be. So for every rejection you have, it's like, yes, this is good because I keep getting rejected. And the other thing, and we talked about this in our previous conversation, Miguel, too, is you only need one person. You need one person to take a chance on you. But if you go and reach out to 5 people, your chances are pretty hard. If you reach out to 500, I can guarantee one person will give you a job. Guaranteed. Right? And I think that's the other thing I come back to, with this idea of control, which is how much effort can you put into it? And the more you can control and the more effort you put in, the more you'll get back.
I love that, because you're so right. You control your input. You may not control the output, but to your point, if you have, let's say you reach out to 5 people, that's your input, well, the outcome is going to be small. But if you do a 500, of course you're going to get huge results.
Yeah.
So, I love that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very quickly on importance, maybe we already covered this, but in terms of like the importance of mentoring and community and networking in a way that, how does that literally helps people?
Yeah, it's a good question. One, in many different ways. I think two, one in terms of just having people around you that are at the same stage or similar stages and being able to relate and understanding problems and speaking out through what you're doing, getting tips and tricks from where they are and what's happening. Two, I think, especially if you build a good network, the people around you, you never know where they'll be.
Right.
And I remember that was advice that my dad gave me, is you have no idea when you speak to someone how they can change your life. Never. And there's opportunities in my life where literally, like, people I've met at a party were the reasons I got my degree. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have no clue when you meet someone how they can do that for you. And so I think, like, understanding, like, everybody, there is a possibility that everybody you ever meet can help you and change your life in a way you have no idea how. And so to me, the reason I say that is because, one, it's always being nice, always being respectful, always trying to help as much as you can. And then also the other thing is too, is those people then might eventually go on and build huge companies and talk to you. And I was literally having this conversation with a friend of mine on Friday. We went out, he's a former tech founder, and he sold a couple companies and is in the tech world. And he started at Y Combinator, which is this like big sort of accelerator that's in the Silicon Valley many years ago. And he was talking about when he applied to Y Combinator, how, there was all these people around him and he didn't really pay attention that much because they were all kind of there and didn't sort of build a network. Turns out that one of the guys who did is who was around him in his network that he didn't think anything of, founded a company called Deal. And now that man individually is worth $5 billion because his company is a $15 billion valuation. And it was just like he would never have thought, right? He had no idea, he had no clue. And, still to this day, he has the ability to reach out to him. They're not super close, but he has that network and that person that's available. And I think that's the other thing too, especially if I think of Canada, if I think of this next generation. I actually had this thesis, and we haven't talked about this before, but I actually have this thesis that I think the next 3 to 5 years, the most interesting companies that get built in Canada and the ones with, 1, the most impact, 2, the highest returns, and ones that are going to do the best, I think are all going to be founded by immigrants.
Yep.
And I think that immigrant founders and immigrant people understand how to build and the resilience and grit that you need to be successful as an entrepreneur more than other people. And so the reason why I think being a newcomer is so interesting is because if you can get plugged into those networks, if you can get plugged into being an immigrant founder, being an immigrant wherever you are in whatever career you're doing, you'll be surprised at how many people, some of those people, then go on and build unbelievable things. And so I think to me, it's just the fact that, like, I think, a network does so much for you emotionally, physically, spiritually, but also just like helping long term. So no, you need a network because you cannot achieve anything by yourself, for sure.
No, I love that. And you're so right. Like, you are one person away of something amazing. That's my mantra. It's like, I'm just one person away from something incredible.
Well, exactly.
Everybody's connected with everybody, no more than 6 people away. Like, that's also another thinking that I have. And
It's crazy. It's
and
true.
the other day I was also internalizing that the newcomer journey and then the journey of a startup is pretty much identical. It's like you start with a lot of rejection, you start
Yeah.
completely unknown,
Yeah.
invisible. You need to push through, you
Yeah.
need to build a brand, you need to build credibility. People do
Yeah.
business with people that they know, they like, and they trust. So, uh,
Yep.
and coming to the networking part that I was going to say before is like, uh, for people to build and to recommend you and to help you, they need to trust you because they are not going to
Yeah.
put their reputation on the line for a stranger.
Yeah.
Like from my
Agreed.
perspective, our culture as Canadian, it's that risk averse. It's like before I just do something
Yes. Very
crazy,
risk
it's
averse.
like, hey,
1000%.
I need to know you. I need to know that we're good. No? So
Yeah.
oh, I loved it. I have two books recommendation. I don't know if you have read them already, but the best book on networking is Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty from Harvey Mackay.
Okay. I have not.
It's
Interesting.
the
Okay.
best.
Yeah.
Oh, and you're going to love it because it's
Okay.
almost like your
Amazing.
dad. Remind that book.
Yeah.
The author remind me of your dad and your approach. So
Okay. Amazing.
you're going to love it. I
Okay.
think
I'll definitely check
I
that
have
out.
it here. I'm going to show
Awesome.
you. And the second one,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's have you read Matthew McConaughey's book Green Lights? Yeah,
Yes.
I knew
Yes.
it.
Amazing.
I
That
love
is
that.
a amazing book.
I totally
Yeah.
recommend it. It's
Yeah. His memoir is unbelievable. The way he writes too, and the stories are
I was able
fantastic.
to listen to
Like
his
amazing.
audiobook and listening the audiobook on his
Yeah.
voice and how he tells it. It's like it's going in a movie. So,
Yeah.
last questions. What was the most surprising thing you have learned about yourself since leaving medicine?
Ooh, I think for me, it's I am more capable than I think I am,
Wow.
and that also to trust the process, and to trust where you are and to trust the journey. Because I think sometimes, and I was having this conversation with a friend last Friday, the same friend who's this, who had this founder that was in deal, where we were talking about this idea of trusting where you are and trusting decisions that you make and trusting that it will all work itself out. And I am a believer, and I think you do. There's a part of me that you do make your own. You do make your own life, and that there's not all destiny and fate, and that there is some achievement. But at the same time, it's also like trusting that the decisions that you make, and all the failures, all the setbacks, all the good, all the bad, is part of it, and to enjoy kind of where it is. And again, it speaks to this idea I was speaking of, going back to the writing, where I had this idea called like, was I even there when it was happening? And it came from this talk that I saw last year, where there's this guy called Scott Galloway, who's a famous professor of marketing. He's famous in the tech world, and he did this incredible presentation, probably the one of best I've ever seen in person. And at the end of it, he was talking about this thing where he was like, I think about my deathbed, and I think about my wife and how I built such a good relationship with her. I think about my kids and how I was really happy and proud of who they became. I think about my job and how I was able to work on something amazing and incredible. I think about my friends and how I was able to build great relationships and friendships. But the thing I always ask myself is, was I even there while it was happening? And I was like, damn. And then he dropped the mic and left. And to me, that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I think we're always worried about the next thing.
Yeah.
We're always worried about the next goal, the next idea, the next job, the next promotion, status, whatever, purchase. And we forget where we are.
Mindfulness.
And I think to me, it's the idea of being present, and good and bad. All of it is part of the journey. And it's hard, especially in those moments where it's very negative and you get rejected, and no one's rooting for you and you're on your own. But I think the point is to say, like, keep going. Like, you got this. Like, you're good. Like, you'll figure it out. Like, for sure. And if you don't, you'll still figure it out, because you're going to adapt to whatever situations come to it. So I think that has always stuck with me as a trust the process, trust where you are, and also you can do a lot more than you think you can.
100%. Oh man, that was so profound. What was I there when it happened? Wow. Okay. Shocked me. If you can send a tweet to yourself, before coming back to Canada and starting all of this journey of BC and everything, what would you say to yourself? Like a tweet, a series of tweets?
I have a tagline, and to me, it's most important, which is keep going. You're doing great. And I remember coming up with that many years ago, and to me, it's ingrained in my mind, and I will tell everybody till I die. And the reason I say that is, one part of keep going, which is you're not where you are. It's okay to work. It's okay to have goals and direction and purpose and want to do other things. But also the idea of you're doing great, which is like give yourself credit. You got here for a reason. You did a lot. As much as it doesn't think that you are. And I think a lot of times we have trouble giving ourselves love, and we have trouble telling ourselves how what we've done. And so to me, why I really like that is because it's both ideas of like, you should work harder, but also you've done really well. And I always try to remind myself of that as much as, as much as I can, because we all have negative self-talk. We all have bad days. I have days many times where I'm like, what's the point? Should I even do this? Is anybody listening? Do people paying attention? But it's also like, no, like you got here, like you did this, like, and to your point, like, I have conversations with people like yourself and they tell me my career and I'm like, wait, really? You know what I mean? Like, I don't even remember sometimes, because we forget, right? We don't even think and look back. And so to me, the thing I would just tell myself is like, yeah, keep going. You're doing great. Like whatever you're going to do. Don't worry about it. It'll all happen the way it's supposed to happen. So just keep it up.
Wow. I like that a lot. If you have a billboard accessible to all newcomers in the world or in Canada, and you have one message or potentially a series of messages, what would you say to the newcomer right now that we're facing a tough environment for like jobs and economic wise? Canada has a lot of like systemic issues. It's a great country. I love it. And we can do much better. But again, to your point, we have a lot of issues that we need to fix. And we have the most talented people in the world flipping board games and driving cars. So, what would you say to everybody? Say, like, what would be your billboard?
Yeah, it might be too simple, but it's one word, and it's create. And it's this idea of creating the world you want to see, creating the environment you want to be in, creating the life that you want and that you dreamed of, creating something new, creating a new challenge, creating a new job, creating the world that you want to see in front of you. And the reason I say it is because, like, I remember there's a book called The Strangest Secret, and it's by this guy called Earl Nightingale, and it was written in maybe the 1950s. And it's an incredible, like, very short book. You actually can listen to the audiobook. It's a podcast. If you literally look up The Strangest Secret, it's half an hour. It's super short. And it's this idea. I actually listen to it probably once every month, maybe once every 2 months, just because it's like a great reminder. I've been doing that for many years now. And he's like, how do you get to this place where, you can build a life that you want? And he's like, the only job you have to do is create. Just create what you want to see, create what you want to do. And I think a lot to your point about these things in Canada, which is there are so many hurdles. There's so many negative things. There's so many voices and boundaries and all these ideas. But you have the ability to create something. You can create something as small as, a group for your friends. You can create a network. You can create a new job. You can create a new business. You can create, some new technology. You can create anything. And to me, it's just advice that, and again, it's more, I think I'm telling myself it, which is this idea of just like keep creating and like creating new stuff in the world to be there, taking all your influences, taking stuff, for example, that like, where you're from and bringing it to Canada, putting a Canadian spin on it, putting a different idea, like being like, oh, I actually found there's a problem here that somebody's dealing with. I actually found a solution back home. Like, why don't I bring that here, but do it in a different way, right? I think that idea of like blending your background and where you are and where you're from and creating something new based on that here will always help you. So I don't know if that's too simple, but that's the way I kind of
it's quite profound because instead of consume, creating is the completely like on the other side of things where you are building. Exactly like this podcast out of the blue. We're just doing it and with the intention of helping people and guiding people. So exactly, I love that. Do you still have time for one more question? Very last question. This is just like more on my side, personal side, just of our curiosity. If you could have a dinner with any historical figure, who will it be and why?
That is a great question, and there's so many answers I could go with that. To me, the one I think about a lot is Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes.
And he was somebody that I studied a lot when I was in elementary school. I actually wrote a speech on him, and I remember winning our speech competition because I wrote some speech. I can't even remember now, but I did at that time. And I just remember doing a lot of work into him. And I think to have the resolve of somebody like him and to create what he did for India, and to be so, determined and resilient, and, to have hundreds of millions of people follow this, small, frail Indian man against the British into what he did is like profound. It's just like unbelievable. And to me, it's like, people like that, like him and Mandela and Martin Luther King and stuff, where it's like, how did you, to your point, like the world is an incredible place right now, as much as it feels like it's not. It's way better than it was before. And if you had those people in previous generations who still persisted, still accomplished something great, still did something, and they did it with way worse circumstances, well, to me, it's like, okay, how do I learn from that? How do I apply what you've done? And to me, I would ask them, like, how did you get through it? Like, how did you, when this situation happened, when that situation happened, like, when people were murdered around you and people were killed and people like, how did you have the resolve and resiliency and fortitude to keep going? So to me, I think he would be one that I would love to just understand, listen to, speak to, just like figure out for sure.
Dr. Anish. Oh, that's incredible, man. It's been a pleasure. Talking with you has been
Thank you.
The highlight of my day, my week for sure. So thank you so much.
For sure.
I appreciate it.
No, for sure. Thank you.
And anything that we miss, and how can people reach out and more information about your books?
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. So first of all, thank you so much, because this is an honor and a privilege to be able to do this. It was a great conversation, and hopefully people learned something, at least from some of my rants. In terms of where people can find stuff, if you just look up Dr. Anish Kaushal on Amazon, you can find the books there. So I wrote one book called From Here to There. That's about my journey from being a venture capitalist to, being a doctor to a venture capitalist. But it's less so about that as much as it is just changing careers and figuring out, how do you navigate, building a new career that you want. Then I actually wrote another book as well that Miguel and I didn't talk about, but it's a collection of poetry that I started writing a couple years ago. So both of those books you can find on Amazon. That's there. And if you want to see more stuff about what I write in my blog and all the books and stuff, you can check out my website. It's anishexperience.com. I can send it to Miguel. You can put it in the show notes. But it's basically Anish and then experience. And that's everything. But thank you so much, Miguel. Really appreciate the time.
Anish, thank you so much. It's incredible. And we're going to put all of those links on the show notes. And I wish you all the best.
Perfect.
And I'm feeling we're going to invite you back, because there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah. Oh my God, there is. And to your point, once you have the book and we want to talk specifics, and if people can take a look at it and want to follow along, for sure, happy to do that. 100%. For sure.
Well, thank you so much. And have an incredible week.
Thank you, Miguel.
If you have been enjoying our show and finding value in the stories and advice we share, please consider supporting the show by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
We hope you enjoyed this show and that it helps you to find your way or make your way. If you found value, share it with someone who needs it. Until next time, to your success.